The Rebel Capitalist Show.
Do you think because of what's happening with the government and the Fed, I know you haven't followed the Fed too much, but do you think we're seeing a crack up boom the way Mises described it?
I don't know, but it is interesting, at least from the inflation side, that the mainstream media now is running articles about there's a concern that a lot of prices in a lot of categories are rising. And then I
Yeah.
just saw a headline, I haven't read the article, about Biden being asked about whether people should be concerned about rising prices. He just turned around and walked away. I mean, what can you imagine if Trump turned around and walked away, refusing to? They would be up in arms.
You're right.
But yeah, it's hard to know exactly what's going on. I mean, in the short run, we are getting a little bit of a rally because, naturally, if you close your economy for a year and then you open it again, well, yeah, I would think there would be some pent up activity that's now taking place. But in the long run, I think there's a lot of long term damage that's been done, um, that it'll be hard to perceive, and until we're fully rolling again. I mean, we've of course had a lot of delays in the delivery of things, and because of disruptions to supply chains, and it's hard to know exactly how devastating that damage is right now.
Yeah, and the government then is trying to solve the problem by sending out all these stimulus checks. And one thing I wanted to ask you about that is when as I've tried to think through everything that's going on and just find rays of hope, like I was saying before, I've gone back and tried to re-listen to the Road to Serfdom with Hayek, and I've got this one version. I don't know how I downloaded it, but it's got some of his notes that he made and comments after the fact. A couple decades later after he wrote the book. And one of the things he said is he made a distinction between the socialism, the way it's defined, and the way it's used, because a lot of people use socialism more like welfarism, like
Right.
something like Sweden. And
Yeah.
he said that although they've got different definitions, if they take you to the same place, they still take you to totalitarianism. It's just that one, if the government owns the means of production, is going to get you there a lot faster. If you're on that welfare state or welfareism, it's going to get you there, but it might get you there a little slower. So I wanted to ask you, as someone who understands pretty much everything that Hayek wrote and has really thought a lot about it, why is it that the welfare state, it takes us and puts us on that road to serfdom, and if we stay there, it always leads to totalitarianism?
Well, I'm saying is I'm not convinced that it does.
Okay.
I don't think that if we visit Sweden 100 years from now, it's going to be a totalitarian society. So I think that's kind of overblown. And frankly, I'm not even really that big of a fan of the road to serfdom. I think he makes way too many concessions in it. And I think a lot of the arguments in it are applicable to a Cold War time, or well, it was written in 1944, but are applicable to a world of states owning the means of production. But
Yeah,
I
because
think
I think in the editorial, I think he said he specifically wrote that to push back against the narrative for central planning after World War II, because he felt as though Americans would look at winning the war and be like, "Oh, well, look at how great central planning is.
yeah.
If it works so well defeating the opposition, why wouldn't it work in the economy?"
Yes, right. He is trying to prevent the Western countries from having more planned economies, but and that obviously that's a valuable thing, because we saw after World War One the thought that, well, gee, we planned in war because there was a lot of economic planning in World War One. Why can't we plan in peace? And so
Mhm.
that became the rallying cry, the ideological precedent for the New Deal of the 1930s. Well, we're just going to take what we did during wartime, and we'll. In fact, it really was the ideological framework of fascism, because the thought there was, in during the war, we left behind all the petty things that differentiate us from each other. So yeah, there are different regions of Italy, and we live and speak differently, but during war, we come together as one, and that's what we want to replicate now in the post-war period, is this idea of unity and there being one will and a national spirit that we need to summon. And all that is extremely creepy, if you ask me. So yeah, all those things, right? Thinking that we can take what we did to blow things up and use that same kind of approach to build things.
Yeah, right.
That is a danger. But I've never really been convinced that just having a big welfare state means.
So what do you think the checks and balances are? What should we be looking out for and cognizant of when it comes to our personal freedoms and liberty right now?
Yeah, I mean, by the way, I'm against a big welfare state, of course, but which, because to me, what we've seen in this particular crisis is that there's a much bigger danger of totalitarianism that comes from appealing to people's safety and stoking their fears.
Right.
And that, and so, yeah, the thing we have to keep an eye on is popular compliance and shaming of people who question whether all these things are necessary. I mean, one of the great tragedies of all this is that there are so many invisible victims of lockdown. People whose lives have been lost for a million reasons, whose dreams have been dashed, savings have been depleted, businesses have been destroyed. And we can't hear those stories because they don't dare tell them. Because if they complain about what the lockdown has done, they'll be called selfish and evil and indifferent to human life and all that. And that is a real danger. So looking at that, to what extent is the public willing to how callous is the public toward victims like this, toward dissident voices? And they're very callous toward dissident voices. And yet it's very often dissident voices who keep your society free.
Do you see any parallels with McCarthyism?
Well, McCarthy actually was pointing to a real problem, it turns out. We now know, because we have a lot more information than we did then.
But the hysteria,
Yeah, but if the idea is that it drums up hysteria, well, then certainly we have that. I mean, it's been incredible. I mean, the headlines just about states have been unbelievable. Like the Iowa it was either the Washington Post, New York Times, or the Atlantic. I can't remember which one. Ran a headline in February of this year saying, called Iowa the state that doesn't care if you live or die. And then take a wild guess. You look at the graph. Okay, look at the graph, and the cases are going like this. And then right there, it's Iowa, the state that doesn't care if you live or die. And then it keeps going down. Well, apparently they do care, it turns out. Or Georgia, because they opened indoor dining in late April of 2020. It was referred to as an experiment in human sacrifice. And the Washington Post called it the #1 death destination in America. And of course, none of that happened. Georgia isn't any outlier in any way. That's a problem. That right there is demonizing the other side.
Yeah. Well, the reason I find optimism in that is, as far as looking at McCarthyism, is McCarthyism faded away. And so I'm hoping that that the COVID hysteria will also fade away as well. I'm just trying to figure out how McCarthyism just kind of gradually went away, or if there was something that was proactively done. And if there was something that was proactive, how do we do that today with the hysteria that we're dealing with?
I think this is a unique situation, honestly.
Yeah,
I think it's unique. I think it's without precedent.
Yeah.
Because the kinds of measures they used, there's no precedent for this. There's nothing in the pandemic literature saying that you should do this. To the contrary, when it does refer to this kind of policy, it rejects it out of hand.
Yeah, right.
And then to see the general public pitted against each other. I mean, families have been divided over this. They're family members not speaking to each other over this. There are friendships that have been destroyed. There are people's reputations that have been damaged just because they have a different opinion. Like, you're not even allowed to have a different opinion from the holy Fauci, and no one finds that creepy. That is creepy. That's like the definition of creepy.
Right.
Honestly, I think now, one thing that will benefit us is that a lot of people, as I say, I think have continued to go along with some of the outward manifestations of compliance because they don't want to be unpopular and they don't want to be criticized. Well, these people are going to be easy because once the unmasking and other measures start to fall by the wayside, and it becomes less and less common to see people wearing masks, these will be the first people to rip them off.
Yeah, right.
In the same way that they don't want to be the unmasked person now, they don't want to be the masked person when 95% of the society is unmasked. So unfortunately, we have to appeal to their general spinelessness and hope that it actually benefits us this time.